Greetings, folks. Nice to see you again. I'm Dustin Cormier. This is How to Rock Astrology. For those of you who have been watching the series so far, and for those of you who haven't, we are now going to be talking about Pluto's house position. This is a primer. If you haven't been watching the series, it's okay. As I've been saying in all these videos, each of these videos is a video unto itself. This is a primer for talking about the nature of Pluto in the houses in the natal chart, as well as also we'll be talking about its expression in transit to houses as well, thinking of the whole picture. So we are going to talk about this short little primer video, like I said, and from once we get to the end of it, we're going to start talking about Pluto in the individual houses and making an individual video for each one. For now, again, this is just an overall Stephen Arroyo's description of Pluto, sort of like a dissertation, a philosophical article on how to interpret Pluto in any of the houses. So, of course, coming from Astrology, Karma, and Transformation by Stephen Arroyo. This is part of Chapter 4 of this book. We're on page 59 for those who have been watching the whole series. Talking about Pluto as a key to transformation. But again, you can just read this, you can just watch this video on its own if you haven't been watching the series. As usual, this is a live stream. Thanks to my fans who are watching live. Feel free to make a comment, questions, concerns, and I'll try to speak to them. I believe in our last video, I had somebody, it was somebody with 4 capital letters in their name who was watching and who said thank you. And I thank you, whoever that was. I should have got the name, but I thank you for watching as well. And if you are still watching, God bless. Feel free to say hello, and I'll give you a proper hello this time. So, let's continue. This is Pluto's house position. I guess I'll show you. This is this part of the chapter. Pluto's house position. We can say that Pluto's position in the individual birth chart reveals the old ego. This is kind of very much a continuation of the last video, but anyway, I digress. Pluto's position in the individual birth chart reveals the old ego, a snake skin that is bound to be shed. The old shell of the personality, which is still active and which still embodies a considerable concentration of psychic energy. It's like a snakeskin that's dying to be released but just won't let go. As long as this energy remains unconscious and inextricably connected with old patterns of life, it acts as a psychological complex which promotes compulsive and obsessive patterns of thought and behavior in our conscious life. It's only when this energy is freed from the confines of the old shell, the shell which we have now outgrown, that it can be consciously used to help us manifest the essence of our solar individuality, the new way of being which is necessary for our development. Pluto in the individual chart, therefore, symbolizes by house position the deep-seated psychic impressions resulting from past desires and actions, which now manifest subtly as obsessions and compulsions that have no rational explanation. In other words, the true nature of the original desire is no longer clear to us, yet we are still at the position, therefore, we are still at the mercy of this inclination, and it often makes us miserable. Pluto's house position, therefore, also shows where one is living out an old desire or a pattern of behavior and were the results of that overwhelming urge, that unconscious compulsion towards that house, are often creating pain and suffering, whether it's an attachment to a good thing or an aversion from a bad thing, or both of those cases, probably the thing being necessary, but our inner attitude not being able to deal with it, right? If we have something that is terribly deliciously good to us, and it could even be like a trine of Pluto to Venus. We have a lover who we deeply love, and they go out off seas in some crazy world thing that they need to do, and we pine so deeply for the lover, and it feels good, somehow deliciously good, to be attached to that love. And that's really more of a Neptune sort of thing, but Pluto is more like a piece of ourselves that we've always loved, being childish in some way, that we've always enjoyed. It's okay that I'm like this. Even if people don't like it, I'm just so attached to it. This is the kind of thing that can burp up through confrontation and embarrassment and just a Plutonian absolute whitewash to make us let go of those patterns which no longer serve us, which are often creating pain and suffering. Another way of putting this is that we are most intensely meeting our karma in whatever area of life is symbolized at Pluto's house position. Although Saturn is often said to be the planet of karma, this is a bit of an oversimplification, to say the least. Saturn does reveal specific karmic tests and specific needs for self-discipline. But the essence of the law of karma, as the clairvoyant Edgar Cayce puts it, is meeting self. That is the essence of karma, the law of karma. And Pluto's house position shows the field of experience wherein we are meeting our old self and our past desires. The suffering often necessitated by the confrontation with this old self is a clear example of how difficult it is to live up to the ancient axiom, know thyself. Pluto in the individual chart thus reveals what work we have to do at deep levels of our being, what patterns of being we have to let go of, eliminate, or reject. The reason Pluto is often said to represent a higher octave of Mars is not only that both are extremely powerful and assertive influences, but also that both planets reveal in any particular chart specific directions that this energy should take. Whereas Mars represents the energy we have to do work in the world, Pluto represents the energy necessary to do work in the underworld, i.e., at the deeper levels of each person's psychic structure. Whatever house Pluto is found in is highly energized, for it is here that one is in immediate contact with a deep reservoir of concentrated power. This great power can be used to assert one's desires willfully, ruthlessly, and obnoxiously. Or it can be harnessed as positive will and mind power and used to elevate one's higher qualities. Whatever house Pluto is in will show where one is inclined to try to impose his or her will on others. But it is also in this area of life that one can make the most dramatic strides towards personal development. It's a huge, deep layer of egotism, of pride, of inner reactions to one's own self-esteem involved with any dealings with Pluto. There's great energy at one's disposal in whatever area of life is indicated by Pluto's house position. And this energy can lend depth and thoroughness, insight, and power of concentration to those fields of experience if the energy is utilized with full consciousness, which is not always the case. Sometimes Pluto can just be this wild animal that's living inside the room with you. It's like an invisible zebra who's just biting you and kicking you, and you just, yeah, it's this thing that I can't deal with. But it's here, and I got it. Pluto's house position also indicates the area of life in which the individual may feel isolated and lonely, farthest away from the center of the solar system they could be. For in this area, the person prefers to remain buried in his or her own interests. This can indicate a certain antisocial quality due to the fact that one is impatient and demanding in this area of life. This impatience arises from the deep feeling that one's identity, an identity carried over from the past, is threatened, that everything related to that particular field of experience is collapsing and being destroyed at the foundations of one's being. Here again, we see the polarity between the sun, one's true identity in this life, and Pluto, an old pattern of identity from the past, still subliminally active. The old identity is being destroyed, a process that has to be undergone in order for the person to experience a new way of being. I like to make the point that this whole experience of Pluto coming through a house is going to be very different to different rising signs, because different signs will share different houses. The best example I can think of is that in the sign of Cancer, for example, Jupiter rules both Sagittarius, which is the 6th house, and Pisces, which is the 9th house. So to have Pluto in the 6th house for a Cancer rising, they could be dealing with a lot of frustrating, annoying parts of their existence, because the 6th house is aggressive. It relates to Virgo. It relates to constant transformation, especially when Pluto's there. But this 6th house for Cancer, that being Sagittarius, it shares its rulership with Pisces, which is the 9th house for a Cancer. The 9th is the most auspicious house. So the health of Jupiter is going to define how this Pluto reaps the best of its fruits and rewards from the 6th house of a Cancer rising. It's the strength of Jupiter which will align that. Now, if Jupiter's in the 1st house in Cancer and it's close to there, and it has strength, it's got good positive planetary aspects, then Pluto's richness will come through in this very exacting Virgoan meticulous organization and activity and constant churning of energy towards constructive things. This is Pluto using its the early life might not allow the person to open this up this way, but Jupiter in Cancer serving, being of service to people, is eventually going to stop the Pluto's obstruction and open up the heart of Pluto in the 6th house in a proper fashion. That's if Pluto's dispositor is well placed. These are all things that I like to bring into consciousness from Vedic astrology. But I digress. I'm going to keep reading from this book because this is what you guys are here to read. I just like to give you guys those little extraneous cross-cultural references once in a while. So, a few examples may help to explain this connection between Pluto and a resonance with a past pattern of life. Pluto in the 1st house is one of the most difficult Pluto positions to have in a natal chart. Here, the person usually experiences an almost continual identity crisis throughout his or her first 25 years or even longer, an experience that severely affects the person's self-image. 1st house. But where does this feeling come from? I feel that this factor is only explainable in terms of reincarnation and karma. As an example, two people I know were told by reliable clairvoyants about past lives, the influence of which are very active in their present lives. Both people have Pluto in the first house, often known as the house of identity. One person was said to have been a slave in the past, and this demeaning experience could surely account for her lack of self-confidence and her periodic identity crises since childhood. The other person was said to have been in Atlantis, where he was subjected to all sorts of cruel scientific experiments which had a devastating effect upon his sense of identity. Very cool. Kind of psychedelic. Again, this could easily account for his identity problems in this life, in this incarnation. Now, it's theoretical, but it's still interesting to think about for anybody who's open to that sort of supernatural interplay of past lives with the present life. It's a viable metaphysical theory for the activity going on through Pluto. Another person who has, remember, Stephen Arroyo is a clinical astrological counselor, so that's why he's bringing up these concrete examples to us of Pluto's activity in a chart. Another person who has Pluto in the 5th house of his natal chart was said to have been the head of a large household and to have wielded a great deal of power over other people. This tendency carries over into this life as an inclination to lord it over others, Pluto, and to forget that they have their own desires and rights. Remember that the 5th house correlates with the lordly sign Leo. Another example, the clairvoyant Edgar Cayce said in his own psychic reading that he had once been in a position of social authority, shaping the lives of thousands of people when he was a priest in Egypt. This explanation corresponds to Cayce's natal Pluto being in the 10th house of authority, and anyone who reads Cayce's biography cannot fail to notice how often he had clashes with those in authority during his lifetime. Pluto clashing with the authority of authority, 10th house. We can gather from the above examples that Pluto's house position shows a past pattern of life that is carried over into this life. The power from the past is still there, but evidently the time has come to use that power in a new way, in this incarnation or by transit. So if it's natally in this house, you've got to use, the time has come to use that power in a new way for the whole incarnation. This whole incarnation is about learning to deal with that. In transit, then, if Pluto's transiting this house throughout that whole period of time, we will be learning about using the power and energy of that house and its dispositor in a whole new way. The time has come for that old pattern of life to die and for a new way of being to develop. At this point, one might well ask how this new way of being can develop when each of us is chained to the old. I can only answer that one must consciously let go of the old and open oneself to the influence of others so that one can learn new attitudes towards that area of life. This letting go is especially difficult for Plutonian and Scorpionic people, for they hate to let go in any way, since they fear that the resulting openness will make them vulnerable and thus will be giving the power they want to keep into the hands of others. How can one have the faith to let go if one has no trust in others, in one's own motivations, or indeed in life or God. This is the dilemma which any person faces if he or she has a strong accent on Pluto, Scorpio, or even on the 8th house in the natal chart. It's a deep feeling of being able to let go at some deep, deep way. We might say, therefore, that the first step in dealing with this type of problem is to learn to trust, primarily by taking the risk of opening oneself now and then, and coming to realize that one can handle whatever ensues, even if it does bring pain and embarrassment and shame with it. One of the contradictory qualities of Pluto is that those who have emphasis on this planet, or its sign, or its house, are often so courageous and fearless of suffering in their approach to outer life activities and challenges. Yet, these are the same people who are often terrified of encountering the pain of their own deeper feelings. This process of learning a new approach, of refining one's mode of self-expression and the use of one's willpower, has often been called regeneration. Hence, we can say that Pluto's house position reveals the area of life where a complete regeneration must take place. This regeneration changes willfulness, compulsiveness, and ruthlessness into a consciously usable power of great intensity, which then manifests as a penetrating insight, an understanding of subtle forces, often resulting in knowledge years ahead of their time, and the use of the will to promote creative actions. Those are all great, incredible, powerful things, the positive side of Pluto and Minerva. The Pluto energy can also be directed into healing channels. In fact, many people who specialize in healing merely by laying on of hands or through other systems of healing by touch often have a prominent Pluto in their charts. It should be emphasized that the Pluto energy is so effective in healing because it is simultaneously an outgoing, forceful power and a receptive sensitivity. It's a two-way nexus in that sense, where anybody who has a specific emphasis of Pluto is both very willful and forceful, but also very receptive, sensitive, intuitive, empathic. Now, we have talked all about a little bit about Pluto's house position, what it means for each individual chart. Now we are going to get into some personal readings about what about Pluto's individual house positions. And from here, I'm going to do a long go on each of the Pluto in the houses readings. So, for anybody who's been watching, I hope you've been enjoying. Coming up next, the following sections provide hints and guidelines for interpreting the meaning of Pluto in the various natal houses. Please keep in mind that these are only guidelines and are meant primarily to elicit insights in your own mind related to the person whose chart is being examined. How positively or negatively the various potentials are being expressed is up to you and your astrological discernment to judge. I've got lots of ideas about what might be the best discerning markers for a significant influence of an outer planet's placement by transit or by natal in the natal chart, including being in an angular house, interacting with an angular lord or a trinal lord, or is being in one of the trinal houses, the 5th, the 9th, or even the 1st, especially the 1st, really. Being in the 1st house, being in interaction with the 1st lord, or the sun, or the moon, or the Atmakarika for Vedic people. These are all things that can really also I would say for Vedic people, the rising Navamsha Lagnesha, the ascendant lord of the D9 chart, Vedic stuff. These are all important little clues defining what might make up a significant placement of Pluto in the chart. Right now, we're going to go through all of these different Pluto in the chart positions and placements. And after that, we're going to finish today talking about the last little bits of Pluto by aspect. So I hope you guys enjoy this coming little bit. For a while, we're going to be talking about all things Pluto in the houses. Thanks for watching.